This week on Brian Ross Investigates, parents' passion, the mothers and fathers of school shooting victims demanding gun reform, a multi-million-dollar settlement for the makers of the AR-15 rifle used to kill children at the Sandy Hook School.
True justice would be our 15-year-old, healthy and standing next to us right now.
A father climbs a construction crane across from the White House to send a message to President Biden about the death of his son and others at the high school in Parkland, Florida.
I was thinking that Joaquin needed me to get all the way to the top of that thing and send a message to the nation and to the world.
Plus, lessons from the great influenza pandemic of 1918. How will it all end this time?
If we're truly not through this pandemic, and if another variant of concern pops up and we have to roll back some of these measures, I'm not sure it's going to be that easy to do so.
And this week's winners and losers in the media. See if you agree with the choices made by the editors of Mediaite.
The DNC emails were very clearly stolen from within the building, most likely by a Bernie Sanders supporter.
From the studios of the Law&Crime Trial Network in New York City's Herald Square, this is Brian Ross Investigates. Good evening, and thank you for joining us, and welcome to our friends watching on Facebook Live. I'm Brian Ross, joined as always by my colleague Rhonda Schwartz. And Rhonda, we begin tonight with a story of the passion of parents whose children have been killed in one of the all too many horrifying American school shootings. Those moms and dads have become a powerful force for safe gun reform, fighting stiff resistance at every turn. But now there's been a major victory, Rhonda.
Brian, gun manufacturer Remington, the maker of the AR-15 style weapon, has agreed to a $73 million settlement with the families of 9 young victims of the shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School that killed 20 first graders and 6 adults. Remington admitted no liability, but it is the largest payout by a gun manufacturer in a mass shooting case. And the parents hope the case will be an important step in punishing gun manufacturers for the way they market their weapons.
David and I will never have true justice. True justice would be our 15-year-old, healthy and standing next to us right now. But Benny will never be 15. He will be 6 forever, because he is gone forever.
Nothing will bring Dylan back. The closest I get to him now is by kissing his urn every night, telling him I love him and I miss him. But I made him a promise, and I'll keep working to deliver that promise for the rest of my life. My hope for this lawsuit is that by facing and finally being penalized for the impact of their work, gun companies, along with the insurance and banking industries that enable them, will be forced to make their practices safer than they've ever been, which will save lives and stop more shootings.
At the White House, President Biden called it a historic settlement, echoing what the president said last December on the 9th anniversary of the deadly Sandy Hook shootings.
As a nation, we owe all these families more than our prayers. We owe them action.
The settlement came on the 4th anniversary of the deadly shooting at another school, the high school in Parkland, Florida. And some of the parents of the children killed in that shooting were protesting in Washington over a lack of action. One father, Manny Oliver, actually climbed a huge construction crane across the street from the White House to protest, unfurling an image of his late son, Joaquin.
Oliver climbed a 150-foot construction crane not too far from the White House, hoping to bring awareness to gun control across the country.
Manuel Oliver, who lost his son in the mass school shooting in Parkland, Florida, delivered a message to the president.
I asked for a meeting with Joe Biden a month ago.
Oliver was released from jail shortly after and went back to the White House, continuing to demonstrate. He says being arrested is nothing compared to losing his son.
And we're joined now by Manny Oliver. Mr. Oliver, thank you so much for joining us. Tell me what you were thinking as you climbed up that crane across the street from the White House.
I was thinking that Joaquin needed me to get all the way to the top of that thing and send a message to the nation and to the world. That message was not only for the president, it was for a whole society to understand how bad this gun violence issue has become.
It's been now more than 4 years since you lost your son. You feel you cannot get heard by the president, by President Biden, who promised to do all sorts of things to reform and increase gun safety.
When we spoke, my wife Patricia and myself, when we spoke to President Biden, and during his campaign, he was very serious about this issue, and we took it as a serious issue for him. We had a connection, an emotional connection. By both of us went through the loss of a son, of a loved one. So I really believe in his words, and but right now it's more about results. I'm not only blaming Biden itself. This is a inaction that it's beyond the White House. But the president of the United States is Joe Biden. So I think is who deserves to receive the message first.
And if you were to meet with him, what would you say to President Biden?
A few things, but I will ask him to prioritize this issue with a statement that is really powerful and legit, not with promises and false expectations. I think that a leader like Biden could easily handle this issue just by being a little more aggressive, and he has a great opportunity at the State of the Union. That's on a general way. I mean, being more specific, I already asked his advisors to name a national director for gun violence, like a national office of gun violence. That's easy for him to do. It will mean a lot to us, and it will require no voting or no agreements between politicians. It's just his call.
As you know, Republicans in Congress have blocked every effort to impose some sort of gun safety reforms. What do you say about this whole situation in Washington, that they aren't hearing you and other parents who have lost their children?
Well, shame on them. They were elected by people, so they should protect people. They should be concerned about this. They've heard us, and I have no doubt that they've heard us, basically because we keep on doing things like what we did yesterday. And it's beyond Republicans at this point. It's becoming more ethical than political.
You saw the parents from the Sandy Hook have now received a settlement from Remington, the maker of the AR-15. Is that a path that you may want to go down?
I think it's important. I think it marks a precedent. I think it holds accountable the gun industry for the first time ever. And I'm hoping that this is the first of many. I'm happy for those families by winning this battle. What we went through is priceless. No amount of money will compensate our loss. But in terms of moving forward as a society and being more, a little more justice, bringing a little more justice to the whole gun issue problem, I think is a good first step.
You were arrested after you came down from the crane. How does it stand with you legally, and are you planning to do more actions like that?
Yes, I am planning to do way more than that. This is a process. I learn every day how to react. If something is not working or I feel that it's not strong enough, I will move on to another campaign, to another action. I would love to start having more people doing the same thing. This is good trouble, right? Good cause. So, and yes, I will go through some consequences, legal consequences, but I have my lawyer and I have all the support that I need. So it's a minor consequence if you compare these to what other people are suffering every day they lose a loved one.
You and so many parents have been through so much. You must think of your son every day, even though it's been 4 years since you lost him.
Every minute. You know what? I've learned from my son a lot since the last 4 years. My son was a very well educated, smart guy. He had everything, athletic. He was a role model. And he left many messages, like literally messages, like posting, tweeting on social media. So we went over all that information that usually a dad won't do because you just respect those limits, right? But Joaquin left us a book of instructions, and we follow those instructions. What we do is an extension of what Joaquin will be doing. He requires us to do it because you need physical presence to do those, which is also why we make sure that everything is protecting our safety. I mean, what I did yesterday was under very safety measures because I need to be here. I cannot allow myself not being here or risking my life. Otherwise, Joaquin wouldn't have his dad to do the things that I do.
And you feel if Joaquin was still here, he'd be taking the same sorts of actions?
Joaquin would be on a higher crane. Absolutely.
All right. Manny Oliver, I want to thank you so much for being with us here tonight.
Thank you very much.
Coming up next, what we can learn from the end of the killer flu pandemic of 1918. You're watching Brian Ross Investigates on the Law and Crime Trial Network.
Hi, this is Dan Abrams with exciting news for all of our Law and Crime followers on YouTube. You can now get the live Law and Crime Network with YouTubeTV for all of your daily live trial coverage, legal news, expert analysis, and original true crime programs. Subscribe to YouTubeTV today and then locate Law and Crime in the channel guide. And for only $1.99 a month, you can add the network to your bundle. Watch Law and Crime every day with YouTubeTV. We put you in the jury box.
Across big parts of the country, the cases of COVID-19 are dropping sharply, and the masks are about to come off, as a number of governors are preparing to lift mask mandates in their states. So, what does history teach us about how the pandemic might end, or whether it's too soon to return to normal?
And we're joined now by Professor Alex Navarro from the University of Michigan Center for the History of Medicine. And Alex, thank you so much for being here. We see the masks coming off in this country. What are the lessons from 1918 as to how the influenza epidemic then ended?
So I think the big lesson from 1918 that we can draw is that while we don't know where the COVID pandemic is headed, we hope that it's going to end soon. The lesson from 1918 is that when health departments started to remove those social distancing orders and masking orders in 1918, some cities had to re-implement them. They were not through with their pandemic, and it became very difficult, if not impossible, to do so. So the concern that I have today, if history is any lesson, is that as we see states removing their masking orders, if we're truly not through this pandemic, and if another variant of concern pops up and we have to roll back some of these measures, I'm not sure it's going to be that easy to do so.
How did it end in 1918? Just suddenly went away?
No, not at all. In fact, pandemics, they all end, but they don't just end overnight. You'll have a slow diminution of cases, or rapid as we're seeing today, and it will eventually reach some sort of baseline. And that will likely be seasonal with a respiratory disease such as COVID.
In 1918, was there the great resistance to masks? There was no vaccine then.
There was, by and large. Now, I can't say for sure how many people, I can't put a percentage on how many people complied versus how many people didn't. What we do know is that by and large, most people seem to comply with most of the social distancing orders, the closure orders, et cetera. The one thing that really got people angry in 1918 were in those communities that implemented mask mandates. A number of communities did, especially out west, Denver, Seattle, San Francisco, Oakland, et cetera. And in those communities, we have ample evidence that there were many people who did not wear their masks, and there were lots of others who had their masks with them and maybe thought they could get away without wearing it, and were caught by police officers. And in most of those cases, they were arrested and fined. In San Francisco, there were 2 mask mandates. When the epidemic was not over and there was another surge, they implemented another round of mask mandates, but no closure orders. And that second round of mask mandates really angered a lot of people, so much so that an anti-mask league was formed, and about 2,000 people met to complain about the masks and to listen to lectures by some physicians in the area who said they didn't work, politicians who said it was an infringement on their civil liberties, all of the same types of things that we're hearing today.
And what similarities do you see between then and now in terms of this resistance to mask mandates and, of course, now the vaccine mandates? Where does that come out of?
Well, I think there's a deep-seated, sort of social understanding in America that we hold our personal freedoms, our individual freedoms very dearly. And of course, people did in 1918 as well. And so there's resistance to, the notion of the government telling you or forcing someone to do something that they don't want. And that's understandable. I think the big difference, though, between 1918 and today is that resistance in 1918 was by and large not political. It may have been ideological, but it wasn't partisan. There were people who were both Republicans and Democrats in terms of both politicians as well as voters who either agreed or disagreed with the mask mandates. And the party lines weren't drawn nearly as heavily as today. We have no evidence that this was there was any partisan opposition in 1918, unlike today, where it really heavily does fall along party lines.
Indeed, it does. So based on what you've seen in the history, what do you expect to happen now in this country going forward?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. We're talking about the end of the pandemic. I think it's probably a little bit premature to talk about the end of the pandemic. We talk about what will society look like after. We don't really know if 1918 is any sort of guide. The fact is that when the restrictions were removed and when public health officers and other officials essentially signaled that the epidemic was over, people by and large went back to their lives as normal. And pretty quickly. Now, certainly those who lost family and friends, they grieved, but that grieving was done largely in private. There were no large memorials or commemorations of any of the big milestones. And people were by and large more concerned with the war. And of course, the war ends on November 11th, 1918. And that's really, I think, what drives popular culture and the response after in that 1919 into the early 1920 period is really the response to the end of the war and not so much a response to the end of the pandemic. People just essentially rushed headlong into what life was like pre-pandemic, going out to movies, going dining, going bowling, et cetera.
And finally, comparing the death tolls between then and now?
So this is a little bit tricky. So, we don't have an official death toll for the 1918 pandemic. Historians estimate around 675,000 Americans had died. We're obviously well above that. I think we're at 910,000 Americans dead from COVID. So in terms of raw numbers, COVID is deadlier, but in terms of a case fatality rate, influenza in 1918 was deadlier. There were far fewer Americans, about a third. The nation was about a third the size it is today in terms of population. So more people who got sick from influenza died in 1918 than in terms of COVID. But of course, that largely has to do with the fact that we have better medical therapies, we have ventilators, medical oxygen, and obviously vaccines today.
All right. Professor Alex Navarro from the University of Michigan Center for the History of Medicine, thank you so much for being with us here today.
You're welcome.
Up next, this week's winners and losers in the media. See if you agree with what the editors of Mediaite had to say about Tucker Carlson and Fox. You're watching Brian Ross Investigates on the Law and Crime Trial Network. Time now for this week's winners and losers in the media, as chosen by the editors of Mediaite. And we're joined by Aidan McLaughlin, who's the editor-in-chief of Mediaite, which, like the Law and Crime Trial Network, is part of the Dan Abrams Media Group. And Aidan, you've chosen as your winner this week the New York Times for a front-page blockbuster story, 5 bylines, more details on the travails at CNN.
That's right. It is a 5 byline piece, a giant expose that was just dropped about how Jeff Zucker, who was the chief of CNN until earlier this month, came to fall. He ran the network since 2013. His downfall was followed shortly after Chris Cuomo's downfall, who was the 9 p.m. anchor on the network. And this New York Times expose gives a lot of new details about this. One crucial piece of reporting that it adds is that it gives a little bit more details as to a certain sexual harassment allegation against Chris Cuomo during his time at ABC that we didn't know about until now. We knew that it existed because CNN alluded to it in a statement when they fired Chris Cuomo towards the end of last year. But the Times really gave some new details on it. And another bit of reporting that Chris Cuomo, his accuser, alleges that he reached out to her and ended up airing a flattering segment on CNN about her new company during the Me Too movement. Now, she believes, according to this New York Times report, that was an effort to silence her. If so, that would be a huge violation of journalistic standards, a massive ethical issue for CNN, on top of a sexual harassment allegation against Chris Cuomo.
A bombshell report that continues to shake CNN. For this week's loser, Tucker Carlson at Fox. Look what he had to say about the latest conspiracy theory, an old one that he's beating the horse about again.
Vladimir Putin did not hack the DNC. There was never any evidence that the Russians hacked the DNC. Instead, the DNC emails were very clearly stolen from within the building, most likely by a Bernie Sanders supporter who wanted to show the world how Bernie Sanders was being shafted by the very same corrupt forces in Washington that later shafted Donald Trump.
Now, Aidan, hasn't that theory been totally debunked, even by Fox?
That is right, Brian. So that theory that Tucker Carlson is alluding to there is the Seth Rich conspiracy theory, which holds that a young 27-year-old DNC staffer was the source of the Clintons' emails, which were sent to WikiLeaks and eventually published. Now, we know that Seth Rich was not the source of those leaks. He was killed. That's what started the conspiracy theory. His murder remains unsolved. But police say that there's nothing suspicious about it, and there's nothing linking him to WikiLeaks. What we do know from Robert Mueller's investigation, which contradicts what Tucker said on there, is that Russia was behind those leaks to WikiLeaks. In fact, Robert Mueller indicted 12 Russians as having been involved in that hack. So what Tucker's saying on air there is just completely invented. And Fox News actually got sued a couple years ago by the Rich family for pushing that conspiracy theory and settled with the Rich family reportedly for millions of dollars. So the fact that that conspiracy theory is being again promoted on air is really troubling.
So Fox settled and he raises it again?
Again, a couple years later. Now, Fox did not settle because of comments that were made by Carlson. At the time, it was Sean Hannity who was actually pushing that theory. But Fox News retracted all its reporting and settled with the family. So it's just bizarre that he's bringing it up again.
Well, once again, some strange stuff from Tucker Carlson. Aidan McLaughlin, thank you so much for being with us tonight, for your continued great reporting on what's happening in the media.
Thanks, Brian.
And thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. That is our program for tonight. Thanks for being here. We'll be back again next week.